next hour, I'll be reading from the April 8th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: trader fatigue helped to shape a muted close for major U.S. stock indexes, with the S&P 500 rising less than 0.1%, the Nasdaq gaining 0.1%, and the Dow Industrials falling 0.2%. Pershing Square said it offered to buy Universal Music Group in a deal that values the world's largest record label at about $60 billion. The Treasury Department proposed regulations that it said would fundamentally reset the U.S.'s anti-money laundering rules, handing banks another victory. The U.K. barred entry to Kanye West following a backlash over a planned performance at a London music festival and the rapper's history of anti-Semitism. Elon Musk is working with Intel on his Terafab project, which aims to build specially designed chips for SpaceX, XAI, and Tesla. Anthropic is preparing to arm some of the biggest technology companies with tools to find and patch bugs in their hardware and software. Novo Nordisk launched its higher dose Wegovy weight loss shot in the U.S. after regulators cleared it for distribution there. Gilead agreed to buy German biotech company Tubulis for $3.15 billion to expand its portfolio of a cancer technology that aims to better guide chemotherapies to tumors. Delta Airlines will increase fees for checked baggage on domestic and select short-haul international routes as carriers look to offset soaring jet fuel cost. Consumers' expectations for inflation in the months ahead increased last month as the war in Iran began, a New York Fed survey found. Now for the key articles under the Worldwide section. Trump backed down from a threat to wipe out the entirety of Iranian civilization, saying he had agreed to a 2-week ceasefire deal with Iran in the hope that Washington and Tehran would be able to complete a long-term peace agreement. Oil futures shed more than $10 a barrel to drop below $100 a barrel Tuesday evening in New York after Trump's announcement on social media. The Trump administration has rebuffed requests from Ford and other U.S. automakers for relief from aluminum tariffs after fires at a major American factory created supply bottlenecks. The U.S. made a public show of backing Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban in his bid for re-election, with an appearance by Vice President J.D. Vance at a political event in Budapest. The Trump administration is hanging on to the $70 million jet that Kristi Noem leased during her tenure atop the Department of Homeland Security. Republican Clayton Fuller won the special election for Georgia's 14th congressional district, formerly held by Marjorie Taylor Greene. Federal authorities said immigration and customs enforcement officers shot and injured an immigrant during a targeted traffic stop in Northern California. 3 assailants opened fire at police outside a building housing the Israeli consulate in Istanbul, starting a gunfight that left one attacker dead. Saudi Arabia raised the price of its oil grades to record premiums as the near closure of the Strait of Hormuz choked off supplies out of the Persian Gulf. Australian police arrested a decorated veteran who served in Afghanistan and charged him with 5 counts of war crimes. A California man who co-founded one of Mexico's most powerful and violent drug cartels pleaded guilty in the U.S. to a federal narcotics conspiracy charge. The picture on the front page shows a large group of mainly men carrying Iranian flags at what appears to be somewhat of a rally. And that caption reads, "Iranians rallied in Tehran after a ceasefire was announced shortly before President Trump's deadline to wipe out the country." The headline on the older version of today's paper says, "Trump threatens to wipe out Iran." The new version states, "Trump backs off threat to level Iran." President says at 11th hour he agreed to a 2-week ceasefire after warning a whole civilization will die tonight, by Alexander Ward, Summer Saeed, and Elisa Lutpak. President Trump backed down Tuesday from a threat to wipe out the entirety of Iranian civilization, saying he agreed to a 2-week ceasefire deal with Iran in hopes the countries will be able to finalize a long-term peace agreement. "We have already met and exceeded all military objectives," Trump wrote on Truth Social, "and are very far along with a definitive agreement concerning long-term peace with Iran and peace in the Middle East." Trump said that the agreement was subject to the Islamic Republic of Iran agreeing to the complete, immediate, and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran said it had achieved its war aims and signaled its intent to continue control over the strait, the world's most important energy shipping lane. Trump posted his statement about 90 minutes before a deadline he set for Tehran to cede to his demands, and more than 10 hours after he threatened to annihilate the country. The president's threat to wipe out Iran sparked a backlash in Washington, with lawmakers on both sides of the aisle criticizing the president's rhetoric. "A whole civilizations will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will," Trump wrote on Truth Social on Tuesday morning. The president added that maybe something revolutionary will happen because of the many killings of Iranian leaders, which he considers regime change. The U.S. halted all offensive operations in Iran following the president's Tuesday evening announcement, according to a senior U.S. official. "The reason for doing so is that we have already met and exceeded all military objectives and are very far along with a definitive agreement concerning long-term peace with Iran and peace in the Middle East," Trump posted on social media. The U.S. has struck more than 13,000 targets over 39 days of war. Trump had threatened to strike all of Tehran's power plants and bridges. Under international law, the military is allowed to strike civilian power plants and other key infrastructure only if they contribute to a military operation and civilian harm is minimized. Trump said in his post on Truth Social that the U.S. had received a 10-point proposal from Iran that was a workable basis on which to negotiate. He said that almost all of the various points of past contention have been agreed to, and that the 2-week period will allow the agreement to be finalized and consummated. Iran's Supreme National Security Council reiterated Tehran's own plan for a peace deal, which includes the regulated passage through the Strait of Hormuz under the coordination of the armed forces of Iran, thereby conferring upon Iran a unique economic and geopolitical standing. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghi said on X, for a period of 2 weeks, safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz will be possible via coordination with Iran's armed forces and with due consideration of technical limitations. Trump had said the 2-week ceasefire was contingent on Iran reopening the strait. Prior to the war, more than 100 ships passed freely each day through the strait. Iranian officials in recent days have indicated they want to make permanent their influence over the strait, putting forward proposals for charging transit fees similar to those charged for the passage through the Suez Canal. According to mediators, it wasn't clear if Iran would abandon charging ships or give access to all ships seeking to cross. Iran's Supreme National Security Council said that negotiations with the U.S. will start Friday in Islamabad, Pakistan's capital. The council said the 2-week ceasefire could be extended if both sides agree. The Day Trump's Threat Gripped World by Wall Street Journal staff at 8:06 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time Tuesday. President Trump issued the most dramatic ultimatum of his presidency. Unless Iran struck a deal in the next 12 hours, a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. Even for a president who has long relied on maximalist threats, the 85-word post was startling. It ricocheted from the Oval Office to foreign embassies and corporate suites, setting off a countdown to Trump's 8 p.m. deadline and a frantic global guessing game over what the world's most powerful man was prepared to do. Less than 90 minutes before his deadline, Trump backed down, writing in a social media post that he had agreed to a 2-week ceasefire with Iran and would suspend his threatened strikes subject to the immediate reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Trump had spent days warning that he would bomb Iran's bridges, power plants, and other civilian infrastructures, insisting the country's people would be willing to suffer that in order to have freedom. As he appeared to threaten to destroy a country of 93 million people, he also seemed to leave the door open to a deal to avert the calamitous strikes. Who knows, he wrote on Tuesday morning. We will find out tonight, one of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world. As the hours ticked by, everyone from Pope Leo to actor Ben Stiller called on Trump to back down. Administration officials fielded phone calls from executives and political allies trying to decipher whether Trump's threat was a bluff or a prelude to an escalation. European officials huddled on a call and largely convinced himself that Trump would back off. On Wall Street, traders and executives treated the day like other Trump deadlines that have come and gone. As a negotiating tactic, they largely expected to pass without catastrophe. Trump's social media posts lighted up group chats across the globe and set off a scramble by U.S. allies and mediators to find an off-ramp or buy more time. As his threats made the rounds in Iran, many residents prepared for power and gas to go out and debated whether it would be safer to stay in the city or decamp for the countryside. Some dusted off old camping stoves and refilled oil canisters. When the pain becomes deep enough, the fear fades, a 42-year-old Iranian woman said, citing 5 weeks of war and years of repression and economic crisis in the country. Less than 30 minutes after Trump's post, Iranian officials told Egypt that Tehran had cut off direct communication with U.S. negotiators, according to officials from an Arab government. Officials from multiple Arab governments warned that the president's threat would likely have the opposite effect on Iran's hard-line Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which had signaled that it would plunge the region into darkness if Iranian infrastructure was attacked. Trump's post made headlines in Israel as people there were getting ready for the end of Passover. At 6:32 p.m., Trump announced on Truth Social that he would hold off on his planned strikes, subject to the Islamic Republic of Iran agreeing to the complete, immediate, and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz. I agree to suspend the bombing and attack of Iran for a period of 2 weeks, he wrote. Some U.S. officials said they were worried Iran wouldn't fully meet Trump's demands, potentially bringing both Washington and Tehran back to the brink in 2 weeks. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Office Buildings Sell at Fire Sale Discount by Peter Grant. The U.S.'s battered office market is holding a fire sale, featuring some buildings marked down by more than 90%. In Chicago, real estate developer Mark Calabria bought a 485,000 square foot office building for $4 million. The building sold for $68.1 million a decade ago. Developer Azer Luzzatto paid a mere $5.3 million for the Denver Energy Center after a foreclosure process. The two-building complex sold for $176 million in 2013. Even the federal government's landlord is getting in on the act. The General Services Administration sold last month a 940,000 square foot building to a residential converter for $24 million, a tiny fraction of its value a few years ago. Landlords and their lenders held on to their office towers for years, hoping for a turnaround after COVID. Now they are accepting enormous losses. Activist launches $60 billion Universal Music bid by Garrett Vipers. Bill Ackman's Pershing Square Capital said it had made an offer to buy Universal Music Group in a deal that values the company at about $60 billion, the latest attempt by the activist investor to land the world's largest record label. The deal for the company that works with Bad Bunny, Taylor Swift, and the Beatles, if approved, would close by the end of the year and would involve Universal merging with Pershing Square Spars Holdings, a specialty created acquisition vehicle. The new entity would be based in Nevada and would shift its stock listing from Amsterdam to the New York Stock Exchange, Pershing said. Universal counts some of the world's biggest selling artists on its books, including Bob Dylan, Kendrick Lamar, Elton John, Coldplay, and Billie Eilish, one of the big three record labels alongside Warner Music's Group and Sony Music Entertainment. The company commands a market share of more than 30% of the global recorded music business. This is one job accountants would love for AI to take over. Auditors are still sent on messy trips to count chickens, rocks, corn, and frozen fish. By Mark Maurer. Matt Gardner recently climbed a series of 90-foot grain bins to measure billions of bushels of corn. He and his team got so covered in thick dust that they had to be sprayed down with air hoses before returning to their cars. It's one of the hazards of the job, along with fertilizer-soaked boots, ripped pants from ladder cages, and encounters with pigeons, mice, and sleeping bats. Gardner isn't a farmer, he's an accountant. The third-generation Iowa-based auditor has to review and verify the financials compiled by his clients, largely agricultural businesses. He uses a laser to measure grain, but there's no tool inside the bins that can save him from having to climb. There's so much dust in the process of getting grain into a bin that would have to have a little windshield wiper on the sensors to constantly clear it, Gardner said. I think that would be great. Accounting firms and their clients are increasingly using artificial intelligence and drones to do work long handled by humans. But so far, there's been no technological solution to what is often the dirtiest part of an audit, counting inventory. That means the messy, bizarre field trips remain a rite of passage for young professionals in an otherwise desk-bound field. Given the pace of development in AI, there is hope that help may be on the way. AI can count something faster than a human can, so you can see it coming, said Christian Pio, KPMG's U.S. assurance leader. Now for other articles within the paper. Delta Airlines raises bag fees as higher fuel prices take a toll. By Connor Hart. Delta Airlines will raise fees for checked bags on domestic and select short-haul international routes, a move that comes as airlines look to offset soaring jet fuel costs stemming from the Iran war. Delta said Tuesday the price of first and second checked bags will increase by $10 each, while the cost of a third checked bag will rise by $50. The price increase goes into effect Wednesday, bringing the cost for the first checked bags to $45 and the second to $55 and the third to $200. These updates are part of Delta's ongoing review of pricing across its business and reflect the impact of evolving global conditions and industry dynamics, a Delta spokesperson said. U.S. oil retreats to below $100 level by Ryan December. Oil futures shed more than $10 a barrel to drop below $100 a barrel Tuesday evening in New York, after President Trump said on social media that he has agreed to a 2-week ceasefire with Iran, which will reopen the Strait of Hormuz. West Texas Intermediate futures for May delivery had settled Tuesday afternoon at $112.95 a barrel, up 0.5%, and about 69% higher than at the end of February. They were back to trading below $100 and on track for one of the biggest daily declines ever, after Trump said Iran had agreed to allow safe passage through the strait, where roughly 20% of the world's oil supply flows. Though the benchmark domestic oil price pushed to its highest price in nearly 4 years, Tuesday's regular session produced the second smallest daily move since the U.S. and Israel began bombing Iran. Automakers rebuffed on aluminum tariff relief. The Trump administration has so far rebuffed requests from Ford and other U.S. automakers for relief from aluminum tariffs after fires at a major American factory created supply bottlenecks for vehicles, including the F-150 pickup, according to people familiar with the talks. Last fall, 2 fires at the Novelis aluminum rolling plant in Oswego, New York, took the facility offline at least until this June. The fires occurred in the part of the plant where aluminum is rolled into thin sheets that are later stamped into automotive body parts. The plant is the largest domestic supplier of aluminum sheet for the U.S. automotive industry, serving about a dozen companies, including Ford, Stellantis, General Motors, and foreign automakers with U.S. production facilities. Atlanta-based Novelis, a unit of India's Hindalco Industries, has been making up for the lost production at Oswego with aluminum from its plants in Europe and South Korea. But the company's imported metal is subject to a 50% duty under President Trump's tariff regime. That cost is passed along to automakers when they purchase the aluminum. The disruption has most affected Ford, which relied on the plant for the aluminum exterior of its F-150 truck, the longtime best-selling automobile in the country. In recent weeks, Ford has petitioned the Trump administration for assistance, asking officials for relief from the duties at least until Novelis Oswego plant returns to full service, according to people with knowledge of the conversations. The discussions are a part of continuing conversations between automakers and the administration about the impact of Trump's tariffs, the people said. So far, the administration hasn't budged, the people added. While conversations continue, Trump officials have also told the companies that they have already provided some relief from other national security tariffs last year, when they allowed major automakers to recoup some of the tariff cost that they had paid for automotive parts, which are subject to 25% levies. Ford, which hosted the president in January for a factory visit outside Detroit, said in February it had already taken a $2 billion hit from the fires and expected to spend $1 billion more this year on imported aluminum from abroad. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, the UN offers no help on Hormuz. Russia and China force reluctant U.S. allies to decide for themselves. In times of crisis, serious people don't turn to the United Nations. The failure on Tuesday of an already watered-down Security Council resolution to try to do something, anything, about Iran's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz again shows why. Now the states in Europe and Asia that had hoped to hide behind the UN logo must make a real decision. Russia and China vetoed it naturally, as their interest isn't the greater good or the rule of law. They want an American defeat. The resolution, sponsored by the Gulf state of Bahrain, strongly encourages member states to coordinate efforts, defensive in nature, to restore freedom of navigation in the strait. It reaffirms the rights of states to defend their vessels from attacks and provocations. The original version, before it was weakened in vain to try to satisfy Moscow and Beijing, more directly authorized the use of force and called on states to use all necessary means to open the strait. But even the softer statement went too far for Russia and China, which operate with Iran as an axis of authoritarians. The Gulf states might want to keep that in mind. 11 states voted in favor, from Greece to Panama, while mediator Pakistan and leftist-led Colombia abstained. But a veto is a veto, so the UN's highest decision-making body will contribute nothing to ending the Hormuz crisis. Late Tuesday, President Trump announced a 2-week suspension in the bombing campaign against Iran, subject to the regime agreeing to what he called the complete, immediate, and safe opening of the strait. If a deal isn't reached, the U.S. would benefit from naval help from allies, and all would benefit from opening the strait. But the Europeans apparently want Security Council authorization before committing. Then they wouldn't be helping Mr. Trump, but enforcing international law. The United Arab Emirates pushed the UN resolution proposed by Bahrain to give hesitant states the fig leaf they might need to act. With that avenue now blocked, as was always foreseeable, there's no more dodging if Iran continues to block the strait. States will have to judge for themselves and, in doing so, reveal their loyalties. From the opinion pages, in Estonia, NATO practices for a drone war. The multinational battle group showed progress, but also raised questions about the Allies' readiness. By Jillian K. Melchior, Tapa Camp, Estonia. If Russia attacked Estonia, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's multinational battle group would be the first line of defense. On a sub-freezing February day, I joined British soldiers who, along with some 250 French troops, comprise the roughly 1,200-man battle group to see how well they are learning the lessons from the war in Ukraine. During the ACES spyglass exercise, I saw real progress as the British forces drilled with drones and electronic warfare. Yet I left uneasy that NATO partners aren't sufficiently prepared for today's warfare. Here's a brief recap of some of the ways war is changing. Cheap weapons like aerial drones threaten expensive targets, especially when deployed in huge numbers. Use expensive countermeasures against them, and you'll quickly find your resources strained. Technology is evolving rapidly, which requires faster and nimbler procurements. Ubiquitous drones and sensors can provide combatants with a continuous real-time high-definition picture of the battlefield. What's visible there is vulnerable. The unprecedented quantity and detail of battlefield data requires changes to how intelligence is collected, analyzed, and disseminated. We're not talking about change at the margins, said retired General David Petraeus, who is studying the evolution of military technology on frequent visits to Ukraine. We're talking about a complete overhaul of how war is waged and how it should be envisioned in the future. During the NATO drill, I saw changes to training, the types of personnel being cultivated, the facilities where warfare is drilled, and to some extent, the material used. But I also saw worrisome indicators that some NATO military leaders haven't fully absorbed the lessons from Ukraine and haven't adequately adjusted doctrines or policies, including vital changes in procurement. The British troops in Estonia come from Britain's 12th Armored Brigade. By the time of my visit, that brigade had put about 100 soldiers through a month-long course focused on electronic warfare, the use of drones for reconnaissance and strikes, countering drones and tactics, said Major Guy Walker, the ACES spyglass exercise coordinator. I watched as a drone zoomed in low through the Estonian woods. Only a few seconds elapsed between the drone's eerie buzz and its hitting its target, a net strung over a military vehicle. The goal isn't to become competent on any specific model of drone. Instead, the training for the soldiers of the 12th Armored Brigade focused on fundamentals like hand-eye coordination on controls, evasive maneuvers, and rapid attacks. Practicing in the terrain they could someday have to defend, British soldiers also learned practical lessons like how quickly a drone battery drains and how slowly it charges in frigid weather. During the NATO exercise, troops knelt in the snow to set up an unwieldy device resembling an antenna, known as the Kraken system. Plant 3 of them, and you can triangulate the position of an enemy drone among other targets. Under a new British Army initiative aiming to accelerate the deployment of new technologies, the Kraken was released in months, not years, still longer than it takes in Ukraine, but breakneck speed in the world of Western procurement. The NATO battle group in Estonia now has a 3D printer to make drones or build spare parts. The battle group's youngest members are showing a proclivity for using new tech to solve problems. One soldier recently 3D printed a replacement for a broken fuse box cover. Cultivating creative initiative at even the lowest unit levels is an important military mentality shift. It has been vital for Ukraine. The next step is for NATO's Tinkerer soldiers to scale up production. Since August 2024 in Ukraine, the Russians have been using unjammable, stealthy fiber optic drones that get their signals from a thin wire resembling fishing line. This NATO battle group has only 10 or so of them to train with, and these are a recent acquisition. As of September, Russia produced more than 50,000 fiber optic drones a month, according to state-run media, and there are many other sorts of drones on the battlefield. Ukrainians now deploy some 9,000 drones daily, a Ukrainian military official estimated in October. Ukraine's target is to build 7 million drones this year. A Russian official recently said Moscow's goal is to train more than 70,000 drone operators in 2026. It's unclear if NATO military leaders fully grasp how the ground fight changes when so many drones are deployed on the battlefield. War eventually comes down to the moment when metal meets metal, said Major James Curry, second in command of the NATO multinational battle group in Estonia. Taking and holding territory still requires close combat, and to advance rapidly, you need mobile, protected firepower. The war in Ukraine should be making it clear how much more difficult it is to field tanks and armored vehicles en masse on a battlefield dominated by drones. The weapons that can reliably disable tanks are so pervasive and inexpensive that it's impossible to operate larger armored formations, says Fred Kagan of the American Enterprise Institute. It isn't hard for a drone to knock a tank off its tracks, leaving the crew stuck and giving the enemy a chance to finish the job at leisure. But NATO doesn't seem to be fully on the same page. I fundamentally disagree that tanks are any more vulnerable than they used to be, Major Curry told me. And it's true that there have been ways to kill tanks about as long as there have been tanks. Major Curry also praised the sturdiness of the British Challenger 2 tank, which he said is capable of surviving multiple drone strikes. You would never just willy-nilly launch a tank, Major Curry said, describing how troops would prepare the battlefield through efforts like identifying enemy drone outposts and pre-positioning jammers. But drones are a highly dispersed threat, which makes them much harder to target at their source. This in turn makes it hard to shape the battlefield before your armored formations roll in. The dispersion of the drones also complicates air cover for ground forces. Major Curry described several multi-layered mitigations for a drone-saturated battlefield. That includes using drones for tasks that once would have required sending a soldier to the danger zone, having troops hunker down in underground bunkers, and increasing efforts to evade detection. The last line of defense is shooting down drones, but the goal is to avoid ending up in that situation to begin with, he said. We don't want anyone shooting down a drone with a shotgun. Yet, that's what Ukrainians have sometimes had to do, and it's one recourse NATO forces practiced during ACE's spyglass. I saw a soldier shoot down a practice drone after a few misses. Because practice drones are in limited supply, the troops also practice by shooting down clay pigeons, though they move more predictably than drones. In real life, soldiers would likely be under attack by multiple drones at once. For all the progress the British forces in the NATO multinational battle group showed, I found myself worrying about them. In extremis, no one has a better solution right now for the drone threat to tanks and armored vehicles. Not the Russians, not the Ukrainians, and not NATO. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Robert Mueller and Trump too. If Democrats take power in Congress again, let them study their mistakes. By Holman W. Jenkins, Jr. President Trump got appropriate grief after the death of Robert Mueller, whose departure the president applauded. If the press were a little more even-handed, a couple of points for Mr. Trump might have appeared in the ledger. The compendious information collection of U.S. intelligence agencies meant that Mr. Mueller knew, before he started his investigation, that no information existed pointing to Trump collusion with Russia in the 2016 election, only evidence of fabrication by his political enemies. For 2 years, Mr. Mueller withheld this critical knowledge from the American people about the man they had elected. His actions had consequences and still do. I have readers who bought the collusion guff and still cling to it out of embarrassment. Far more consequentially, guess who wasn't blinded by their priors from seeing the truth? The 74 million who voted for Mr. Trump in 2020 and the 77 million in 2024. That's why he's president now. All this is about to matter again. George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley provides an insight into last week's firing of Pam Bondi. Mr. Trump is readying his administration for a new spasm of investigations and impeachments if Democrats win Congress in the fall. Unless they have undergone a hidden reformation, they should also have serious doubts about whether Democrats will do their duty as an opposition party in a way that leaves the country better off. Take the criticism Obama Defense Secretary and CIA Chief Leon Panetta has been dishing out about Mr. Trump's Iran war, some of which is even cogent. He's unwise to open his mouth. In lying about the Hunter Biden laptop in 2020, Mr. Panetta not only behaved like Russia's Siloviki, intelligence officials who meddle in domestic politics. In effect, he knew the Biden campaign on the mercy of Vladimir Putin, who, during the final weeks of the campaign, might have raised a stink, but didn't, about Russia being falsely accused to muddy the truth about a purely private Biden mess. 2 months after Joe Biden took office, Russia began moving tens of thousands of troops toward Ukraine's borders and into Crimea in July 2021. Mr. Putin published an essay justifying his coming invasion. Unprovable is Mr. Trump's claim that the war wouldn't have happened if he'd been reelected. Provable is that Mr. Putin invaded when the White House was occupied by an aged, feeble president who had relied on Russian silence to protect him from his son's laptop scandal. Americans aren't always going to lie to themselves about this. At least their historians won't. Consider another piece of unspoken history. At a January 22nd House hearing, when Biden administration prosecutor Jack Smith, the most important question went unasked, though it was certainly on the mind of every politician in the building. Mr. Smith, aren't you partly responsible for re-electing Mr. Trump? Mr. Smith's prosecutions were unlikely to be resolved before Election Day. Mr. Biden was cheering them on. Everyone knew why. The reason could be found in a report by Mr. Smith's fellow special counsel, Robert Hur. It confirmed what a majority of voters already believed. Mr. Biden was too old. He was an elderly man with a poor memory. This isn't hindsight on my part. I banged away from mid-2022 that Mr. Biden's only hope was having Mr. Trump as an opponent. Widely predicted at the time and borne out in practice, a cavalcade of criminal charges levied by partisan Democratic prosecutors indeed succeeded in rallying back to Mr. Trump many of the GOP voters who wandered off after January 6. Let's not be disingenuous about all this. The press at the time lied about these matters not out of conspiratorial intent, but out of fear of being called pro-Trump. Many of my own readers can't get enough of January 6 and yet regard it as beating a dead horse to recall the lies of Trump's enemies that actually played a bigger role in returning him to office. Happy are the few in this life who actually make it to psychological adulthood. The editors of the London Review of Books aren't conspicuous Trump fans, but they are appreciators of cause and effect. Their latest issue features a highly contemptuous examination of the words and deeds of former British spy Christopher Steele, who worked with Democrats as they developed their collusion hoax. Americans aren't always fair in their likes and dislikes. In their disgust with the traditional media, revealed in survey after survey, their feelings are perhaps founded on more than mere prejudice. Hardly better is their view of the Democratic Party in recent surveys, which is unfortunate since we live in a time when America needs both a competent opposition party and a competent news media. The American middle class keeps getting richer. Study after study finds that the populists of left and right are wrong in their predictions of doom. By Jason L. Riley. Capitalism is rigged. China is eating our lunch. The middle class is shrinking. This is the constant refrain from doom and gloom populists on the left and right. But is it true? Earlier this year, the Journal editorial page told you about a study from the American Enterprise Institute's Stephen Rose and Scott Winship that pushes back on that glum narrative. This week, the Journal's news department followed up with a front-page story highlighting that research which demonstrates upward mobility in the U.S. is alive and kicking. Messrs. Rose and Winship divided households into 5 categories: poor or near poor, lower middle class, core middle class, upper middle class, and rich. Technically, the middle class has been getting smaller, but that's only because more families have ascended the income ladder. We find that the core middle class has shrunk, but so too has the share of Americans with income too low to reach the middle class, the authors conclude. The shrinking core middle class is due to a booming upper middle class. Only the relatively worse off parts of the middle class have shrunk, and by less than the upper middle class has grown. In 1979, the upper middle class was 10% of all families. By 2024, it was 31%. Over the same period, the share of families with income below the core middle class declined from 54% to 35%. Family incomes rose significantly across the entire income distribution, pushing more families into higher income categories, the study found. Other studies show similar patterns. Yes, the rich have gotten richer over the decades, but so have the non-rich. Everybody is doing better, Richard Fry of the Pew Research Center told the Journal. Other research tracked individuals instead of households and found that upward economic mobility has been the norm as people gain experience and seniority. A University of Michigan study found that nearly 30% of people who were in the bottom quintile of earners in 1975 had risen to the top quintile by 1991, and only 5% of individuals initially in the bottom quintile had remained there. A U.S. Treasury Department analysis, income mobility in the U.S. from 1996 to 2005 concluded more than 50% of taxpayers in the bottom quintile moved to a higher quintile within 10 years. The suggestion that there have been no appreciable gains in income or material well-being in recent decades for the tens of millions of workers who populate the country's middle class has no basis in reality. The Pepper and Salt cartoon shows two young women seated at a table with drinks in their hand, and one says, "I thought I was on my deathbed, but it turns out I just needed the mattress flipped." You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 8th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal, which we read every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening.